Every afternoon, little Zoe waited by the window for her mum to come home from work. This week, her grandmother started telling her something different, something Zoe was far too young to understand, wasn't true. Nobody realized the babysitter was still in the next room, listening to every single word. And what she heard changed everything. Before we begin tonight, if stories like this move you, take a second and press that subscribe button and leave a comment below telling me if you've ever noticed a loved one saying something small that just didn't sit right with you. It genuinely helps stories like this reach the people who need to hear them. Now let's begin, because what started happening in Barbara's kitchen this month had been building quietly for years, long before anyone else in the family ever noticed. Melissa had been raising Zoe on her own since her divorce 2 years earlier, working long hours as a hospital administrator to keep their small house steady and their bills paid on time. Zoe was 6 years old, bright and curious, the kind of child who asked 100 questions a day and remembered every single answer. 2 afternoons a week, while Melissa worked her longer shifts, Zoe stayed with her grandmother, Barbara, who lived just a short drive away and had always seemed thrilled to have that time with her only granddaughter. Melissa was grateful for the help, genuinely grateful, though something about Barbara's warmth had always carried a small, careful edge underneath it that Melissa had never quite been able to name. Barbara had never approved of Melissa working as much as she did, though she rarely said this directly. Instead, she found small, quiet ways to mention it. A gentle comment here about how children needed their mother's home more. A soft sigh there about how different things were back in her day. Melissa absorbed these comments the way she'd learned to absorb most things from Barbara, telling herself her mother-in-law simply had old-fashioned views about work and family, nothing more complicated than a woman who'd raised her own children differently. She had no idea that Barbara's quiet disapproval had been slowly hardening into something far more deliberate over these past 2 years. Melissa had recently decided to hire a part-time babysitter, a sweet, responsible young woman named Anna, to help cover the afternoons when Barbara had her own appointments or simply needed a break. Anna was a nursing student, patient and warm with children, the kind of caregiver parents feel instantly comfortable leaving their kids with. Melissa introduced her to Zoe carefully over a few short visits, watching happily as the two of them bonded quickly over coloring books and simple card games. Barbara met Anna briefly during one of these visits too, offering a polite, pleasant smile that gave absolutely no indication of anything unusual happening beneath the surface of her carefully maintained warmth. Zoe adored her grandmother, the way most young children adore the person who bakes them cookies and lets them stay up 10 minutes past bedtime. Barbara's house always smelled like something sweet in the oven, her living room always stocked with exactly the right toys Zoe loved most. Melissa felt genuinely comforted knowing Zoe had this kind of relationship with her grandmother, especially after the difficult transition of the divorce, believing wholeheartedly that Barbara's home was simply one more safe, loving place for her daughter to feel completely secure. What Melissa did not know, dropping Zoe off at Barbara's house every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon with a quick kiss and a wave goodbye, was that Barbara had slowly begun using these quiet afternoons for something far more troubling than baking cookies and coloring pictures. It had started small, almost unnoticeably, a passing comment here, a subtle question there, Nothing Barbara herself would have called anything more than simple honesty. But over these past several weeks, something in Barbara's careful, quiet conversations with her granddaughter had begun shifting into something Melissa would never have imagined possible from a woman she trusted completely with her only child. This particular Thursday started like any other. Melissa dropped Zoe off just after noon, running through the usual routine. A quick reminder about Zoe's snack preferences, a hug goodbye, a promise to be back by 6. She drove to work that afternoon thinking nothing more of it. The same comfortable routine she'd followed for months, without a single moment of concern. She had absolutely no idea that today, for reasons even Barbara herself couldn't fully explain, something in her mother-in-law's quiet conversations with Zoe was about to cross a line that had never been crossed quite this clearly before, and that someone else, standing just outside an open kitchen window later that same afternoon, was about to hear every single word of it. Barbara had started small, weeks earlier, telling herself each time that she was simply being honest with Zoe, preparing her gently for a disappointment Barbara herself had quietly convinced herself was inevitable. It began with something as simple as a passing comment, while they colored together at the kitchen table, Barbara mentioning softly that some mummies got so busy with work they forgot how important their little girls were. Zoe, only 6 and eager to understand the world around her, had simply nodded along, filing the comment away the way children do, without questioning where it had come from or why her grandmother would say such a thing. Over the following weeks, these small comments grew slightly bolder each time, though Barbara never once raised her voice or said anything Zoe could clearly repeat back as unkind. She'd mention, gently, how she worried sometimes that Zoe's mum might be happier without so much responsibility weighing her down. She'd ask seemingly innocent questions, whether Zoe ever felt like her mummy would rather be somewhere else instead of coming home to her every night. Barbara told herself, each time she said these things, that she was simply helping Zoe build resilience, preparing her gently for whatever disappointments life might eventually bring, though somewhere beneath that justification sat something far less innocent that Barbara wasn't quite ready to examine honestly. This particular Thursday, Anna arrived a little earlier than her usual scheduled time, having finished her nursing class ahead of schedule and deciding to head straight over instead of waiting at home. She parked in Barbara's driveway and walked toward the side door, the one that led directly into the kitchen, planning simply to knock and let Barbara know she'd arrived early. The kitchen window beside that door sat open just slightly, letting through the warm afternoon breeze, along with the sound of Barbara's voice, gentle and familiar, drifting out into the yard before Anna had even reached the door. Anna paused instinctively, not wanting to interrupt whatever quiet moment Barbara and Zoe seemed to be sharing, expecting to hear something about cookies or a favorite cartoon, the ordinary background noise of a grandmother and granddaughter passing a peaceful afternoon together. Instead, the words drifting through that open window made her stop completely, her hand frozen just inches from the door, as she listened to Barbara's voice continue in that same soft, gentle tone, saying something Anna genuinely couldn't quite believe she was actually hearing correctly. Sometimes mummies get so busy they forget what's really important, Barbara was saying, her voice carrying the same warm, unhurried tone she might use to explain something as simple as tying shoelaces. I just want you to understand, sweetheart, that if Mummy ever seems like she'd rather be somewhere else, It's not because of anything you did. Zoe's small voice answered a moment later, quieter, uncertain in a way that made something in Anna's chest tighten instantly. "Does Mummy not want to come home to me?" Zoe asked, her voice small and genuinely confused, the particular fragile uncertainty of a child trying to understand something far too big and complicated for her to fully grasp. Anna stood frozen just outside that window, her hand still hovering near the door, her mind racing through what she'd just heard, trying to process whether she'd somehow misunderstood the context of an otherwise innocent conversation. But Barbara's next words, quiet and deliberate, left absolutely no room for misunderstanding. "I just want you prepared, dear," Barbara said softly, "in case one day she decides all this responsibility is too much for her. If you've ever overheard something you desperately wished you hadn't, something that instantly changed how you saw someone you trusted, tell me in the comments below. And if you've ever hesitated before speaking up because you weren't completely sure what you'd actually heard, don't be afraid to share that here too, because sometimes the hardest part isn't hearing the truth, it's deciding what to do with it once you have." Anna finally knocked gently on the door a few seconds later, forcing her expression into something calm and ordinary, though her mind was already racing through everything she'd just overheard, replaying Zoe's small, uncertain voice over and over, as Barbara answered the door with her usual warm, welcoming smile, completely unaware that the woman standing on her porch had just heard every single word of a conversation she never intended anyone else to witness. Barbara opened the door with her usual warm smile, completely unaware of anything unusual, greeting Anna cheerfully and stepping aside to let her into the kitchen, where Zoe still sat at the table, a coloring page half finished in front of her. "You're early, dear," Barbara said pleasantly, gathering up a few stray crayons scattered across the table. "Zoe and I were just having a little chat while we colored." Anna forced a small, steady smile in return, glancing briefly at Zoe, who looked up with a quiet, uncertain expression that Anna now understood carried far more weight than it should have for a 6-year-old on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. Anna settled into the routine of the afternoon carefully, helping Zoe finish her coloring page, asking gentle questions about her day at school, all while her mind kept circling back to the exact words she'd overheard through that kitchen window minutes earlier. She watched Barbara move around the kitchen, preparing an afternoon snack, humming softly to herself, seemingly entirely at ease, as though the conversation Anna had just witnessed was nothing more than ordinary grandmother wisdom, rather than something that had visibly unsettled a small child. Anna found herself studying Zoe more closely than usual, noticing small things she might have overlooked before, the way Zoe kept glancing toward the window, as though watching for her mother's car, far earlier than necessary. At one point, while Barbara stepped briefly into the other room to answer the phone, Zoe looked up at Anna with an expression far too serious for her age. "Anna," she asked quietly, her small voice barely above a whisper, "do you think my mummy really wants to come home to me?" Anna felt something twist sharply in her chest at the question, understanding instantly that this wasn't some passing curiosity, but a genuine, aching worry that had clearly been planted and repeated enough times to take real root in Zoe's young mind. "Of course she does, sweetheart," Anna said gently, keeping her voice calm and reassuring, despite the alarm rising steadily inside her. "Why would you ask something like that?" Zoe hesitated, glancing quickly toward the doorway where Barbara had disappeared, before answering in a small, careful voice. "Grandma says sometimes mummies get too busy and don't want to come home anymore," she said quietly. "She said I should be ready in case that happens to me." Anna sat completely still for a moment, processing the full weight of what she was hearing directly from Zoe's own mouth, confirming exactly what she'd overheard through that window wasn't some isolated, misunderstood comment, but part of an ongoing pattern this little girl had clearly been absorbing for some time now. Barbara returned to the kitchen a few minutes later, and Anna quickly shifted the conversation back toward Zoe's coloring page, her mind still racing through everything she now understood, uncertain exactly how to handle something this delicate without making a serious accusation she couldn't yet fully prove. She spent the remainder of the afternoon watching Barbara more carefully than she ever had before, noticing small things she hadn't paid attention to previously. The particular way Barbara sometimes glanced meaningfully at Zoe whenever Melissa's name came up in conversation. Small gestures that now felt entirely different in light of what Anna had just learned. Melissa arrived to pick up Zoe just after 6, exactly on schedule, greeting her daughter with the same warm hug she always gave, completely unaware that anything unusual had happened that afternoon. Anna said her goodbyes carefully, watching Zoe's face brighten instantly the moment her mother walked through the door, a small, relieved happiness that made Anna's chest tighten all over again, with the understanding of exactly how much quiet anxiety this little girl had apparently been carrying without her mother ever knowing. Anna drove home that evening, replaying the entire afternoon over and over, wrestling with whether what she'd heard was serious enough to say something, worried about overstepping, worried equally about staying silent. That night, sitting alone in her small apartment, Anna pulled out her phone more than once, typing out a message to Melissa before deleting it entirely, unsure how to explain something this delicate without it sounding like she was making a dramatic accusation against someone Melissa clearly trusted completely. She thought about Zoe's small, worried voice, asking whether her own mother wanted to come home to her, and she understood, sitting there in the quiet of her apartment, that whatever discomfort she felt about speaking up mattered far less than a 6-year-old girl quietly believing her mother might not want her. Anna picked up her phone one final time, took a deep breath, and began typing a message she knew she couldn't take back once she sent it. Anna's fingers hovered over her phone screen for a long moment before she finally began typing, choosing her words carefully, wanting to be honest without sounding like she was rushing to judge someone she barely knew. She wrote that she needed to talk to Melissa about something important regarding Zoe, something she'd overheard that afternoon that she felt Melissa deserved to know about directly. She hesitated one final time before pressing send, her heart pounding slightly as the message disappeared into her phone, knowing there was no way to take it back once Melissa read it. Melissa called almost immediately, her voice tight with concern, the moment Anna picked up. "What happened? Is Zoe okay?" she asked, her mind already racing through every worst possibility a mother could imagine. Anna reassured her quickly that Zoe was physically fine, then carefully, gently, walked her through exactly what she'd overheard through that kitchen window. Barbara's soft, deliberate words about mummies getting too busy. Zoe's small, frightened question, asking whether her own mother truly wanted to come home to her. Melissa listened in complete silence, and Anna could hear her breathing change slightly through the phone, the particular sound of someone absorbing something they desperately didn't want to be true. "Are you certain that's what she said?" Melissa asked finally, her voice quiet, careful, though something underneath it had already started shifting toward genuine alarm. Anna confirmed everything clearly, repeating Zoe's exact words as closely as she could remember them. "Watching mummies get too busy and don't want to come home. I should be ready in case that happens." Melissa thanked Anna quietly, her voice thick with an emotion she was clearly struggling to control, before ending the call and sitting alone in her kitchen for a long moment, processing the fact that her own mother-in-law had apparently been planting quiet, devastating doubts inside her daughter's mind for weeks. That evening, Melissa sat down gently with Zoe before bedtime, choosing her words as carefully as she could manage, not wanting to frighten her daughter further or make her feel like she'd done anything wrong by sharing what she'd been told. "Sweetheart," Melissa said softly, sitting on the edge of Zoe's bed, "has Grandma ever said anything to you about Mummy not wanting to come home?" Zoe's small face shifted immediately into something uncertain, glancing down at her blanket before finally nodding slowly. "She said sometimes mummies get too busy," Zoe said quietly, repeating almost exactly what Anna had already described. "She said I should be ready, just in case." Melissa felt something inside her break completely at hearing those words directly from her daughter's own mouth, understanding now, with painful clarity, exactly how much quiet fear Zoe had been carrying, without ever once mentioning it. She pulled Zoe close, holding her gently, choosing her next words, with the kind of care only a mother desperate to undo real damage can summon. "Baby, I want you to hear me very clearly," Melissa said softly. "I will always want to come home to you. Always. No matter how busy work gets, nothing in this entire world matters more to me than you." Zoe nodded slowly against her mother's shoulder, some of the tension finally easing from her small shoulders as she absorbed her mother's words. Melissa called Barbara the following morning, her voice steady despite the anger still simmering beneath the surface of her calm tone. "I need you to explain something to me," she said, "and I need the complete truth, not an explanation about your intentions." She repeated exactly what Zoe had told her, watching, even over the phone, as Barbara's initial confident denial slowly crumbled into something far less certain. "I only wanted her prepared," Barbara finally admitted, her voice smaller than Melissa had ever heard it. "I worried, with how much you work, that maybe someday—" "That's not something you get to decide to plant in my daughter's mind," Melissa interrupted firmly, her voice carrying none of the deference she usually offered Barbara. "You made my 6-year-old afraid I don't want her. That's not concern, Barbara. That's cruelty." Barbara didn't have an immediate response for that, the silence on the other end of the line stretching long and uncomfortable, the first real consequence she had faced in years for quietly deciding her own worries mattered more than her granddaughter's peace of mind. Melissa made clear, calmly but firmly, that unsupervised time with Zoe was over completely, until real, demonstrated change happened. No exceptions, no gradual reintroduction without genuine accountability first. In the months that followed, Melissa made sure to tell Zoe often, without prompting, exactly how much she was loved and wanted, watching slowly as her daughter's quiet worry faded back into the easy, trusting happiness a 6-year-old deserves to feel every single day. If this story reminded you that children deserve to feel completely safe and loved, without any doubt planted in their hearts, do me a small favor and subscribe before you go, so you never miss the next story like this one.